All right, you are live.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ربي يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير وبك نستعين يا فتاح اللهم وفقنا لما تحب وترضى. So this is the third lecture of the comparative study of Surah Taha. Actually, this is the fourth one. We did part of it 2 weeks ago, and then we took a week off. So I'll just recapitulate very quickly what we studied in the previous lecture. We are basically focusing on one story, which is about Harun alayhi salatu salam and the golden calf. It is mentioned both in the Holy Quran and the Torah. In Surah Taha, there are verses 80 to 98, but a lot of details also come from Surah Al-Araf, and there is one verse from Surah Al-Baqarah, which is also related to that. In Torah, the book of Exodus, which is the second book of Torah, of the 5 books, it dedicates an entire chapter, chapter number 32, to this story, and there are 35 verses in it. So we did the background from the Quran that after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had saved the people of Bani Israel from Fir'aun and they had crossed the sea into the desert of Sinai, he asked Musa alayhi salatu wasalam to go to the mount for 30 nights and then he added 10 more nights. And Musa alayhi salatu wasalam left early, leaving behind his people who were still mentally slaves, although physically they were free. But mentally they were slaves. They had been living for generations in a community which was given to worshipping the idols. And while they were traveling, they had come across the people who are also worshipping some other gods. So they asked Harun alayhi salatu wasalam to make a golden calf for them so that they could worship it. And it was Samari who actually made a golden calf for them from the ornaments which the Bani Israel had brought with them. Musa alayhi salatu wasalam was notified by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he went back to his community. He was angry. At the same time, he was quite sad. And then he started to question Harun alayhi salatu wasalam. And Harun alayhi salatu wasalam basically mentioned that he did not want to disobey Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, that if he had taken a stand, Bani Israel would have been divided into 2 groups. One would have been with Harun alayhi salatu wasalam, and the other would have been against him, and that it would have led to a civil war. So he didn't do it. And then comes Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. It's a dialogue with Samri. We'll talk a little bit in detail about who this Samri was. But let's start with what was given to Musa alayhi salatu wasalam on the Mount of Sinai. So in Quran, Surah Al-Araf, verse number 145, mentioned that وَكَتَبْنَا لَهُ فِي الْأَلْوَاحِ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ مَوْعِظَةً وَتَفْصِيلًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ فَخُذْهَا بِقُوَّةٍ وَأْمُرْ قَوْمَكَ يَأْخُذُوا بِأَحْسَنِهَا سَأُرِيكُمْ دَارَ الْفَاسِقِينَ. That we inscribed for him upon tables all kind of instructions and details of everything concerning all branches of life, and said, observe these with firmness and enjoin your people to follow them according to the best of their abilities. Soon I shall show you the homes of the transgressors. Another way of explaining it, soon I will show you the way the iniquitous or transgressors will go. So now, what are the tablets? And there are 3 different places in Quran where tablets are mentioned. So the first one is verse number 145, which we just studied. The second is verse number 150 of Surah Al-Araf, and the third one is verse number 154 of Surah Al-Araf. Because this incident is mentioned in Torah as well, I want to focus first on the Quran and then give you the comparative account from the Torah. So Quran mentions, وَلَمَّا رَجَعَ مُوسَى إِلَىٰ قَوْمِهِ غَضْبَانَ أَسِفًا. When Musa alayhi salatu wasalam returned to his people, he was extremely angry, and at the same time he was sad. He said, قَالَ بَئْسَ مَا خَلَفْتُمُونِي مِنْ بَعْدِي أَعْجَلْتُمْ أَمْرَ رَبِّكُمْ. That you have done something bad while I was away, and you have disobeyed the command of your Rabb. وَأَلْقَى الْأَلْوَاحَ. Now, the word alqa can be translated as threw down, or it can also be translated as he put down. So I will go with put down. He put down the tablets. وَأَخَذَ بِرَاسِ أَخِيهِ يَجُرُّهُ إِلَيْهِ. He started to pull Harun alayhi salatu wasalam's head. He started to tug at his hair. And Harun alayhi salatu wasalam appeals to him by saying, Qala ibn O the son of my mother, Innal qawma stad'afuni, my people made me weak, or they considered me to be weak. Wakadu yaqtulunani, they were about to kill me. Fala tushmit bil ada, fala tushmit bil ada, wala taj'alni mal qawm zalimin. So he makes a statement that his qawm thought that he was weak. It's not that he was weak, his qawm thought that he was weak, but they would have killed him if he had tried to do something. So now he's saying two important things. The first is, don't make the enemies laugh at me, which means that if two brothers are fighting, their enemies will say, see what they are doing. And this is a message for the Muslim Ummah, where Muslim countries are fighting with each other and their enemies are taking advantage of them. Second thing he says, Wala taj'alni mal qawm zalimin, do not make me among the people who have done this zulm, this shirk. So it's a very important statement which contradicts what the Bible says and what the modern day Jews also say, that Harun alayhi salatu wasalam did not participate in the making of the calf. Now, next part, وَلَمَّا سَقَطَ عَنْ مُوسَى الْغَضَبُ, when the anger went away from Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, أَخَذَ الْأَلْوَاحَ, he took up the tablets. Now, if we translate وَأَلْقَى الْأَلْوَاحَ as he threw down or he broke the tablets, as the Torah mentioned, then what he was picking up, obviously he would have been picking up broken pieces. But Quran mentions وَفِي نُسْخَتِهَا هُدًى وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلَّذِينَ هُمْ لِرَبِّهِمْ يَرْهَبُونَ, that in it was inscribed the guidance and the mercy for people who fear their Lord. I think the in between the line meaning would be that he did not break the tablets. How could a prophet of Allah break the tablets which were written by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or which were written by the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So I think the alqa doesn't mean he broke the tablets, but I think a more appropriate explanation would be that he put down the tablets because of the respect, and then he approached his brother Harun alayhi salatu wasalam. Wallahu alam. So now what's the comparative account from the book of Exodus? As I mentioned, the chapter number 32 is devoted completely to this incident, and it's an important incident in the life of Bani Israel as well, and they feel sorry about what their predecessors did. So now verse number 15, 16, and 19. And Moses turned and went down from the mount, and the two tablets of the testimony were in his hand. The tablets were written, it's not the tablets, it's the tablets were written on both their sides. On the one side and on the other were they written. So which means that the tablets were written on both sides. And the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, graven on the tablets. And it came to pass as soon as he came near to the camp that he saw the calf, the ijl, and the dancing, which means the people of Bani Israel were dancing around that calf. It's like a Jahili ritual. And Moses' anger waxed hot. Musa alayhi salatu wasalam was ghadaban, and he cast the tablets out of his hand and broke them beneath the mount. Now that's what I'm saying, that the Quranic version, if we look at it in more detail, doesn't suggest that he broke them, he simply put them down. Now, rewriting of the tablets. According to the book of Exodus, chapter number 34, which continues that Ma'azallah Musa alayhi salatu wasalam had broken the tablets. So now the Lord said unto Moses, hew means sew these two tablets of stone like unto the first, which means sew the two together, and I will write upon these tablets the word that were in the first tables which thou breakest. Which means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewrote them after Musa alayhi salatu wasalam had broken it, which is an explanation that I find hard to believe. Now, we had already discussed that last time. Now, what happens to Samri is that Musa alayhi salatu wasalam gave him a punishment. He said, Qala fazab, go away from here. فَإِنَّ لَكَ فِي الْحَيَاةِ أَن تَقُولَ لَا مِسَاسٍ, that during your life, your punishment will be that you will tell the people, touch me not. And our scholars mentioned that he was afflicted with a skin disease that would prevent anybody from coming to him. And if anybody tried to come, he would say, please touch me not, or just touch me not. وَإِنَّ لَكَ مَوْعِدًا لَن تُخْلَفَهُ. And in addition, so that was the first was the punishment in this dunya for him during his life. And the second part is the punishment in future, which will be after he had died. And that promise will not fail. It means there is no way that you can turn away the eventual punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Musa alayhi salatu wasalam tells him, Mansur ila ilahika alladhi zallat alayhi akifa. Now look at the God that you have made, and you became a devoted worshipper, which means that do you think that this God that you have made is capable of protecting you from this punishment? He can turn it away from you. So he says, لَنُحَرِّقَنَّهُ ثُمَّ لَنَنْسِفَنَّهُ فِي الْيَمِّ نَسْفًا. And we'll come to it from Torah, that we will certainly melt it in a blazing fire and scatter it broadcast in the sea. It was made out of fire, so it will be put back into the fire. And that's something very important, that if Ma'azallah, this was a god, fire should not touch it. So he wants to demonstrate to the people of Bani Israel that you melted your golden ornaments into a fire pit and shaped it into the shape of a calf that you worship. Now see if it can itself protect from the fire. And then he gives them the message of Tawheed. Innama ilahukumullahu lazi la ilaha illa huwa wasi'a kulla shayin ilma. But the God of you all is the one Allah. There is no God but He. All things He comprehends in His knowledge. Now, the similar verse comes in the book of Exodus. And he took the calf which they had made and burnt it in the fire and ground it to powder. Lanansifannahu, and he strewed it on the water. Now the Quranic version ends here, but in Torah it mentions and made the children of Israel drink of it. This part does not come in the Quran. So now the points that I want you to ponder as we read through the Exodus. We have already discussed this incident from Al-Araf and Surah Taha. Both versions are adding to each other. But as we move through the book of Exodus, just by way of comparative study, we have to pause and ponder over these points. Why was Musa والسلام, called to the mount? So we know from the Quranic version that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called him and he gave him the tablets. According to the Muslim commentators, these were the 10 commandments given to Musa والسلام, and this was separate from the Torah. Now, who made a demand for the golden calf and why? According to the Torah of Exodus, the Bani Israel, people of Bani Israel demanded it, and it was Harun wasalam, who made it. The Quran rejects it completely and puts the blame on Samri. So we'll talk a little bit more about Samri. Who made the golden calf? It was Samri. Who was Samri? And what was Harun wasalam role in the event? Now, the last part is quite important, not only from the Quran, but also from the later day Jewish scholars. Because if we look at the book of Exodus, the blame is Mazallah put on Harun wasalam. Whereas the later day Jewish scholars mentioned that no, he was not responsible for it. And even if he did it because he was pressurized. But the Quran simply says that he was not at all involved in making it. So now we'll look at some of the selections from the book of Exodus, and we'll read it very quickly. So when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, and this part is also substantiated by the Quran, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron, Harun, and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." In Surah Taha, there is one word, "Vanasiya," and he forgot. And our Muslim commentators apply this to Samri. The Samri forgot who Allah was, but some other commentators mentioned that Nasiya applies to Musa wasalam, that Bani Israel are saying that Ma'azallah Musa wasalam has forgotten to come back. He has left us. So Harun said to them, "Take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." According to the Quran, it was Samri who did it. So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron, and he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Now, who are they? Our Muslim commentators mentioned, and if we look at the Bible as well, that not every Bani Israeli was involved in it. In fact, the Levites, who were the son of Levi, who were actually the descendants of Levi, who was son of Yaqub wasalam, stayed with Harun wasalam, and they did not participate in worshipping the golden calf. So the other group, who was still living with the mind of slavery, started telling others, "These are your gods, O Israel." Now, this may also mean, and there are some commentators who have mentioned, that the people who participated in worshipping the golden calf were actually not from Bani Israel. They were other people. They may have been Coptics, they may have been Samaritans. The word Samari comes from Samaritan, the Samaria from the Syrian community. That they had been worshipping the idols, and they were the ones who told Samri or Harun alayhi salatu wasalam, and then Samri made it for them a golden calf. And now they are telling the Bani Israel that these are your gods. So now when Harun saw this, he built an altar before it, which is not what the Quran says. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. So now, while Musa is still on the mountain, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala notifies him. And the Lord said to Moses, go down, for your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. And this part is supported by the Quran. And the Lord said to Moses, I've seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now, this phrase, stiff-necked people, it keeps ringing through the ears of the Jewish people even till today. And their scholars accepted and acknowledge it, that the action which was done by those people was actually an act of stubborn disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the two tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets that were written on both sides. On the front and on the back, they were written. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, engraved on the tablets. And as soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. Now, as I mentioned, that the word alqa doesn't necessarily mean that he broke them. It can simply mean he threw them down or he put them down. Now, he took the calf that they had made and burned it with fire and ground it to powder and scattered it on the water and made the people of Israel drink it. So here Musa والسلام, is not actually questioning Harun والسلام, and there is no mention of Samri in it. And that's why Quran has spent several verses talking about Samri. Now here Musa said to Harun afterwards. So in Quran he talks to Harun first, then he talks to Samri, and thereafter he burns the golden calf. In Torah it's different. And Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them? And Aaron said, let not the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people, they are set on evil. For they said to me, make us gods who shall go before us. The Quranic narrative is very different in explaining what was going on in the mind of Harun alayhi salatu wasalam. And if we just read the Torah version, we do not get that sense. So that's the beauty of the Quran. Now, what happens next? What does Musa alayhi salatu wasalam do to the people who worship the calf? This part is not mentioned in Surah Taha, but it is mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah. So we look at Surah Al-Baqarah. Then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, who is on the Lord's side? Come to me. And all the sons of Levi gathered around him. As I mentioned, Levi was a son of Yaqub alayhi salatu wasalam, who had 12 sons, and the descendants of Levi had not participated in worshipping the idol. And he said to them, thus says the Lord God of Israel, put your sword on your side, each of you, and go to and from gate to gate, and throughout the camp, and each of you kill his brother and his companion and his neighbor. And the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and that day about 3,000 men of the people fell, which means they killed 3,000 people. Now, if you look at the word, kill his brother and his companion and his neighbor. The brother does not necessarily mean biological brother, although it could, but it could simply mean people who are with you. Now, what does the Quran say? So in Surah Al-Baqarah, Quran mentions, it is verse number 54, وَإِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِقَوْمِهِ, when Musa alayhi salatu wasalam told his people, يَا قَوْمِ إِنَّكُمْ ظَلَمْتُمْ أَنفُسَكُمْ بِاتَّخَاذِكُمُ الْإِجْلَةِ, that, O my community, you have wronged yourselves by taking the golden calf which you have made as your God. فَتُوبُوا إِلَى بَارِئِكُمْ, so then turn or repent towards your creator. And then he says, فَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ ذَلِكُمْ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِنْدَ بَارِئِكُمْ, and kill yourself. Now, one way in which our Mufassirin have explained it, that people killed themselves. But فَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ also means some of you kill the others, which means those who have not worshipped, those who did not participate in this act, should kill those who worshipped. That will be ذَلِكُمْ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِنْدَ بَارِئِكُمْ. That will be best for you in the sight of your creator. فَتَابَ عَلَيْكُمْ. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted their repentance. إِنَّهُ هُوَ التَّوَّابُ الرَّحِيمُ, because he is the acceptor of tawbah. He's always accept the tawbah and he's always merciful. Now, let us look at the verse which follows this, which is again from Surah Al-Baqarah. وَإِذْ قُلْتُمْ يَا مُوسَى لَن نُؤْمِنَ لَكَ حَتَّى نَرَى اللَّهَ جَهْرًا فَأَخَذَتْكُمُ الصَّاعِقَةُ وَأَنْتُمْ تَنْظُرُونَ. This is another incident from the Bani Israel after they had migrated from Egypt. Now, if we look at these two verses, it gives us a sense that the incident in which Bani Israel or some people took the golden calf for worship occurred first, and then comes the second incident where people told Musa والسلام, that we will not believe in you until we see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our own eyes. فَأَخَذَتْكُمُ الصَّاعِقَةُ وَأَنْتُمْ تَنْظُرُونَ. The details of it are that Musa والسلام, then takes 70 people from Bani Israel with him. Those will be the witnesses. And when they reached the mountain, they were struck by lightning and they fell dead. And then they were brought back to life by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the two incidents are actually different, but some of our Muslim scholars actually think that it was only the first, it was just one incident where Musa والسلام, took his people to the Mount of Tur and they fell down, and then Musa والسلام, went up, and then he got the tablets of Torah, and then he came down, and while he was away, other people started to worship the golden calf. Again, Allah knows best, but when I look at these verses, I think the sequence tells us that there are two different incidents. Now, Imam at-Tabri gives us some hint about it. So, Imam at-Tabri explains the acts of disobedience of Bani Israel, who are called a stiff-necked people in the Torah by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not what we Muslims say, it is in the Torah. And Imam Tabri explains it further by saying that the people of Bani Israel, or those who migrated with Musa والسلام, from Egypt, they were saved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them freedom. He provided for them while they were in the desert. And despite this, they committed several acts of disobedience. One was, yes, aluna nabiyahum an yaj'ala lahum ilahan ghayra Allah. First they asked their Nabi to make a god other than Allah. Second, وَمَرَّةً يَعْبُدُونَ الْإِجْلَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. Then they started worshipping the golden calf without worshipping Allah. وَمَرَّةً يَقُولُونَ لَا نُصَدِّقُكَ حَتَّى نَرَى اللَّهَ جَهْرًا. We will not believe you until we see Allah with our own eyes. So now, if we look at it and pay attention, that the third part is after the worshipping of the golden calf. So the two incidents are separate. And then another act, وَأُخْرَى يَقُولُونَ لَهُ إِذَا دُعُوا إِلَى الْقِتَالِ. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered Bani Israel to enter a town for jihad, their answer was, إِذْهَبْ أَنْتَ وَرَبُّكَ فَقَاتَلَا إِنَّا هَاهُنَا قَاعِدُونَ. That they had the insolence to tell Musa والسلام, that you go and your Rabb, and you both fight, Ma'azallah, Summa Ma'azallah, while we are sitting here. And then another act of disobedience was, وَمَرَّةً يُقَالُ لَهُمْ قُولُوا حِتَّةٌ وَادْخُلُوا الْبَابَ سُجَّدًا نَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ خَطَايَاكُمْ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told them to say hitta and then enter through the gate while bowing your head. We will forgive your mistakes. And they changed the word from hitta to hintata. Hintata means shair or wheat. So these are some of the incidents which are mentioned in the Quran, and they are also mentioned in the Torah, and they come under the category of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described in the Torah, if it's really the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, Allah knows, a stiff-necked people. So now, who was Harun alayhi salatu wasalam? Harun alayhi salatu wasalam is named as Aaron in the Bible. The Hebrew, actually, the translation is Haron, which is very close to Harun, and the meaning is of the mountains or the mountaineer. He is described as son of Amram, which in Arabic is Imran, and Jochebed of the tribe of Levi. So as I mentioned, Levi was the son, one of the sons of Yaqub alayhi salatu wasalam, and they were the descendants of Levi. And the priestliness in the Bani Israel actually continued in the lineage of Harun alayhi salatu wasalam. It passed down from him all the way down to Zakaria alayhi salatu wasalam as well. So Zakaria alayhi salatu wasalam was also in a way a Levite coming from one of the tribes of Levi. He was 3 years older than his brother Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, which is mentioned in other references that I had given last week. Their sister is named Miriam or Maryam. And one of the examples is, "For I brought you up out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery. And I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam." So two brothers, Musa alayhi salatu wasalam and Harun alayhi salatu wasalam, and their sister Maryam are mentioned by name here. In Quran, we know the story of the sister of Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, but her name is actually not mentioned. So now, the Quran tells us something very different about Harun alayhi salatu wasalam, which we discussed earlier, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave prophethood to Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, he requested Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make Harun alayhi salatu wasalam wazir. Wazir will be somebody who will be sharing your burden. And he was a prophet. According to Torah, Harun alayhi salatu wasalam acted together with his brother, who is Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, in the desperate situation of the Israelites in Egypt, and took an active part in the Exodus, their liberation from bondage there. Although Moses was the actual leader, Aaron acted as his mouth. This is from the Israeli literature, not from Quran. The two brothers went to the Pharaoh together, and it was Aaron who told him to let the people of Israel go, using his magic rod in order to show the might of Yahweh, which is again contradicted by the Quran, that it was Musa wasalam who did this thing. At the command of Moses, he let his rod turn into a snake. Again, this is contradicted by the Quran. Then he stretched out his rod in order to bring on the first three plagues. After that, Moses tended to act and speak for himself. So according to the Torah, it was Harun wasalam who initially went before the Pharaoh, and he did few things initially. But thereafter, Harun wasalam receives in the background. And it's Musa wasalam on the forefront, which is not what the Quran tells us, and we have discussed that earlier. Now, in Exodus 28:1, it is mentioned that, "Have Aaron your brother brought to you from among the Israelites, along with his sons Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithmar, so they may serve me as priests." As I mentioned, that the rabbinic priestliness, you can say, or the priesthood, was in the lineage of Harun alayhi salatu wasalam. Although I have not put it here in detail, it is mentioned that Musa alayhi salatu wasalam took Harun alayhi salatu wasalam with his sons to the mountain, and he took the robe of priesthood of Harun alayhi salatu wasalam and gave it to one of his sons. Now, there are two accounts of the death of Harun alayhi salatu wasalam, which is not mentioned in the Quran, and the two accounts contradict each other. So in the book of Numbers, which is also one of the 5 books of the Pentateuch, and Aaron died there on the top of the mountain, Mountain Hor. So mountain of Tur is also known as Mountain Hor, Mountain Horab, Mount Sinai. And it is mentioned that he died because he was removed from being a priest. Again, this is not something that is confirmed by the Quran. On the other hand, in Deuteronomy, which is another book of Torah, the Israelites traveled from the wells of Beni Jahan to Mozerah. There, Aaron died and was buried, and Eleazar, his son, succeeded him as priest. So in one account, Harun wasalam died on the mountain. In another account, he did not die there, but he went to a different place called Mozerah. And afterwards, his son Eleazar became the priest. And according to that account, Musa wasalam was alive at that time. It's in the book of Deuteronomy at the end that Musa wasalam dies. Now, the Quran exonerates Harun wasalam, and by telling us what exactly happened and how Harun wasalam spoke with Musa wasalam, defending his case. It is also mentioned partly in Surah Al-Araf, in Surah Taha, verse number 94. قَالَ يَا إِبْنَ أُمِّ لَا تَأْخُذْ بِلِيهَتِي وَلَا بِرَأْسِي إِنِّي خَشِيتُ أَن تَقُولَ فَرَّقْتَ بَيْنَ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ وَلَمْ تَرْقُبْ قَوْلِي. That Harun alayhi salatu wasalam replied, O son of my mother, seize me not by my beard or by the hair of my head. Truly I feared lest you should say, Thou hast caused a division among the children of Israel, and thou did not respect my word. So Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, when he went to the mountain to receive Allah's words, he had left Harun alayhi salatu wasalam in charge. And his instruction was that under no circumstances you should allow a division among these people, because otherwise they will fight, there will be a civil war. So this was the main reason that when Bani Israel insisted on making a calf and worshipping it, Harun alayhi salatu wasalam did not want to strike a division. He did not want people start fighting with each other, because then Musa alayhi salatu wasalam will tell him that, why did you not follow my word? So that's the reason, and I had mentioned al-fitnatu ashaddu min al-qatl. Division, fitna are worse than qatl. And this again ties with the same theme, that the reason Harun alayhi salatu wasalam did not take an action at that time, because he knew that Musa alayhi salatu wasalam was coming, and he did not want that in his absence Bani Israel should fight and kill each other. Now, the later Judaic writings also come to Harun alayhi salatu wasalam's defense, but Quran already has defended him. They mention that Harun, however, escaped punishment for his role in the affair because of the intercession of Moses, according to Deuteronomy, which is chapter number 9, verse number 20. Even later on, they retell this story, and they always excuse Harun alayhi salatu wasalam for his role. Now, who was Samri? And this is something that is mentioned only in the Quran. And our Mufassirun have tried to give us some more details which are not found in the Quran. I don't know what are the sources of those reports, but we will go through them. So, according to one of the Mufassir, Az-Zajjaj, that he was Kana Aziman min Azamai Bani Israel, min Qabilatin Turafu bis Samira, Wahum ila Hazil Ghaya fi Sham, Yurafuna bis Samirin. That he was one of the leaders of Bani Israel, and he belonged to a tribe of Samira, and descendants of that Qabila are still found in Sham, and they are known as Samirin or Samarites. Waqila, now when our Mufassirin mentioned Waqila, it means it was said. It means we do not know who said this. And if we don't know who said this, we cannot verify it. So one opinion is that he was Ibn Khalat Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, that he was son of Musa alayhi salatu wasalam's khala, maternal aunt. Waqila Ibn Ammi, or that he was his cousin from father's side. It is also mentioned that he was from the people of Bajarma, which is a town or a community near Misr, or a town from the Mosul. It is also mentioned that he was a Qibti, not actually a Bani Israel. وَخَرَجَ مَعَ مُوسَى عَلَيْهِ الصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ مُسْهَرَ الْإِيمَانِ وَكَانَ جَارُهُ. That he was a neighbor of Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, and he was a Coptic. He left Egypt with Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, just outwardly showing that he believed in Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. It is also mentioned that he was one of those people who are Ibadul Baqr, who used to worship the calf. And he had left Misr with Bani Israel, apparently showing that he was a believer. وَفِي قَلْبِهِ إِبَادَةُ الْبَقْرِ, whereas in his heart was still the worship of the calf. In another narration, it is mentioned that his name was also Musa, and it was Musa bin Zafar. And it is also mentioned that his name was Manja, but Musa is more popular. Now, Ibn Jarir, which is Tabri, has narrated from Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala that when Samri was born, Fir'aun had ordered that every male child be killed. So his mother, Samri's mother, put him into a cave, and she put the lid on top of it. And then Jibril alayhi salatu wasalam used to come to him, and he used to feed him with one finger dipped in milk and one finger dipped in honey. And there is a couplet or a share, and I couldn't find who actually wrote it, but it is mentioned, فَمُوسَى الَّذِي رَبَّهُ جِبْرِيلُ kafir. The Musa who was nurtured by Jibril turned out to be a kafir, which means Samri. وَمُوسَى الَّذِي رَبَّهُ فِرْعَوْنُ mursal. And Musa who was brought up by Fir'aun became a Rasul. Couplet is good, but we don't know the authenticity of it. وَبِالْجُمْلَةِ كَانَ عِنْدَ الْجَمْهُورِ مُنَافِقًا يَظْهَرُ الْإِيمَانِ وَيَبْطُنُ الْكُفْرِ. That according to majority, he was a munafiq. He outwardly believed with Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, but he was actually a kafir from inside. So now, Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, after he had talked to Harun alayhi salatu wasalam, now he turns to Samri and he asks him to plead his case. So, Saqala fama khatbuka ya Samiri. So, what's your case? How do you plead your case? And Samri mentioned, Qala basartu bima lam yabsuru bihi, فَقَبَسْتُ قَبْضَةً مِنْ أَثَرِ الرَّسُولِ فَنَبَذْتُهَا وَكَذَلِكَ سَوَّلَتْ لِي نَفْسِي. This verse has been explained in different ways. So the first, we look at the translation. He replied, I saw what they saw not. Now it is not qala nazartu, it is basartu, which is also translated as saw, but there's a difference in meaning. So I took a handful. The word qabza is handful, fistful. In bracket, it is mentioned of dust from the footprint of the messenger. Now, who was that messenger? We'll talk about it. And threw it, in parenthesis, into the calf. Thus did my soul suggest to me. So I will give you the classical explanation of this verse, as well as, you can say, a more modern explanation or an explanation given by the rationalist. So now, basartu bima lam yabsuru bihi. Imam Zamakhshari in this Tafsir al-Kashaf mentioned, wal mane alimtu ma lam ta'lamuhu wa fatantu ma lam taftunu lahu. So he's saying that basartu doesn't mean I saw. It actually means that I knew what you do not know, and I understood what you don't understand. And Ibn Masud actually recites min asari rasul as min asar farsir rasul. Now this could be his explanation, that from the footsteps or from the hooves of the horse of the messenger. Now, according to Zamakhshari, the details are given that when the time came for Musa alayhi salatu wasalam to go to the mountain of Tur, Musa alayhi salatu, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Jibril alayhi salatu wasalam, and he was riding a horse. And it's mentioned Fars al Hayat, the horse of life. Allah knows best, that he will take Musa alayhi salatu wasalam on the horse to the mountain. But Samiri was able to see it. And in other narration, it is mentioned because Samiri was brought up by Jibril alayhi salatu wasalam, he was able to recognize, he was able to see Jibril, although nobody else saw. So when Samiri saw that the horse on which Jibril alayhi salatu wasalam was riding was raising dust from its hoof, he recognized that this was blessed dust. So he took a handful of that dust, and that's what called Farsul Hayat, the horse of life. That he recognized that in this dust was the ability to give life. Again, this is mentioned by Imam Zamakhshari and other Mufassirin as well. Now, I will give you how Jalalain mentions it. And this is a different kind of tafsir. Jalalain means two Jalal. It's a very popular tafsir. It is used as a textbook in many madaris of India and Pakistan because it's a one-volume, very authentic tafsir. It is written by two Jalal, Jalaluddin Suyuti, Rahmahullah, and Jalaluddin Mahalli. So part of it was written by Imam Suyuti and part of it was written by Jalaluddin Mahalli. And it's an example of what is called interlinear tafsir. And what interlinear tafsir means is, you can see it, that he first gives verses or the words of the Quran, فَقَبَسْتُ قَبْضَةً مِّن, and then in between he puts an explanation. So it is interlinear in between the line. So he puts turab, which means فَقَبَسْتُ قَبْضَةً مِّن turab, that I picked up a handful of dust. Then asar, he explains it hafir first, the hoof of the horse. Ar-Rasul is the word of the Quran, and he explained Jibril. فَنَبَسْتُهَا, he explains it, أَلْقَيْتُهَا فِي سُورَةِ الْإِجْلِ الْمُسَى, وَكَذَلِكَ سَوَّلَتْ, he gives the meaning of the word سَوَّلَتْ as زَيَّنَتْ, beautified, لِي نَفْسِي, أَلْقَى فِيهَا أَنْ أَخَذَ قَبْضَةً مِنْ تُرَابٍ مَا ذَكَرَ وَأَلْقَيْهَا عَلَى مَا لَا رُوحَ لَهُ يَسِيرُ لَهُ رُوحٌ, that he took the fistful of dust and he put it on something that did not have life. But when the dust touched it, it produced soul in it. It came to life. So this is, I just wanted you to get a flavor of how different tafasir are structured. Now, Yusuf Ali gives an explanation, and he says that Samri's answer is a fine example of unblushing effrontery, careful evasion of issues, and invented falsehoods. So when Samri told Musa wasalam, that I saw what nobody else could see, he was simply making a false statement. He was avoiding the actual issue of why he did it, and he just invented a lie. He takes upon himself to pretend that he had far more insight than anybody else. That's why I mentioned that the Quran uses the word basartu from basira. Quran doesn't say nazartu. So basirat is an insight, an inward vision. He saw what the crowd did not see. He saw something supernatural. The messenger or Rasul is construed by many commentators to mean the angel Jibril. But Yusuf Ali mentioned that, but if we take it to mean the messenger Moses, والسلام, it means the Samari saw something sacred or supernatural in his footprints, which means footprints of Musa. والسلام. Perhaps he thinks a little flattery would make Moses forgive him. So this is a different kind of tangential thinking of Yusuf Ali. The dust became sacred and is throwing it into the calf made the calf utter a lowing sound, as if that was the point at issue. So there's an exclamatory remark. The Samri's short-circuited or round-circuited talk is trying to avoid the actual question and trying to flatter Musa والسلام. He does not answer the charge of making an image for worship, but finally, with arrogant effrontery, he says, well, that is what my soul suggested to me, and that should be enough. So this is how Yusuf Ali is trying to explain it in a different way. Now, Muhammad Asad quotes Imam Razi and Abu Muslim Isfahani, and he tries to explain Samri's answer that I took a handful, which means something of the teachings of the apostle, which is Musa والسلام, and discarded it. So they are giving a totally different explanation, it being understood that the apostle referred to by the Samaritan. So according to Razi, Abu Muslim Isfahani, and Muhammad Hassan, Samri means Samaritan from the town, from the tribe of Samaria, from the community of Samaria. In the third person is Moses himself. And Muhammad Hassan mentions, in my opinion, the Samaritan's rejection of a part of Moses' teaching is meant to explain the subconscious tendency underlying all forms of idolatry and the attribution of divine qualities to things or beings other than God. A futile, self-deceiving hope of bringing the unperceivable closer to one's limited perception by creating a tangible image of the divine being, or at least of something that could be conceived as his emulation. I think Muhammad Asad beautifully captures the psychology of people who worship these idols. Inasmuch as all such endeavor obscure rather than illuminate men's understanding of God, they defeat their own purpose and destroy the misguided devotee's spiritual potential. What a beautiful way of explaining that. And this is undoubtedly the purport of the story of the golden calf as given in the Quran. So here I think that Muhammad Asad is trying to take a message from this story without looking at the details which have been given by the traditional scholars, that what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us is why people, even highly educated people, would worship idol. And when they do that, they actually defeat their own purpose and their own spiritual potential, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in them, they lose it. So this is what, and the golden calf, because it was golden, can also it can also imply materialism, which people worship. There's total spirituality, the spiritual potential, which has been given in our heart by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, goes away. And the hearts of such people become hardened. They can see people suffering, and yet they go on in their own merry way, as if nothing has happened. So now Samri's punishment, we have already talked about it, so we'll not go into the detail. Now, I will try to give you a comparative account in a summary form, in both the Quran and the Exodus, that Musa alayhi salatu wasalam is absent for a while. because he has gone to the mountain to receive the commandment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he rushed, leaving behind his community who was still in the mindset of slavery. Making of the golden calf mentioned in both places. People worship the calf mentioned in both Quran and the Torah. Musa alayhi salatu wasalam and the tablets, which we discussed, mentioned in both with some difference. Musa alayhi salatu wasalam questioning Harun alayhi salatu wasalam is mentioned in both. Musa alayhi salatu wasalam request Allah forgiveness. We'll come to that. And what is Allah's response to Musa alayhi salatu wasalam? Now, this is something very important. And there is I don't have the time to go into it, but a lot has been written about the comparative account in the Torah and in the Quran. In the Torah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is portrayed as extremely angry, and Bani Israel has to go through a very painful process. Whereas in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is portrayed with his mercy, Rahma. And actually in the Hebrew literature, Rahuma is also mentioned, that Allah finally, according to them, showed his Rahma, Rahuma. Whereas the Quran portrays that no matter how big a sin is, if people turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will forgive them. And when Harun alayhi salatu wasalam talked to his people, as he was talking to Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, that this is what I told them, he reminded Bani Israel that your Rabb is Rahim, is Rahman, and you should repent and turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And despite your gravest sin, he will still forgive you. So the Quranic account focuses on the morality. Quranic account focuses on the intellect, on human psychology, and telling us that we should never despair of Allah's mercy. No matter how much greater the sin is, Allah's mercy is even greater. So now let's take a look at it. So Musa alayhi salatu wasalam is now asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. Qala rabbi ighfirli. Now he's asking Allah to forgive him. No, that's the prophet. That's the humility of a prophet. Because he showed anger, which was justified in a way. But he is asking Allah to forgive him first. Wale akhi, then my brother. Okay, so he's saying that what I have done deserves to be forgiven before my brother, because I shouldn't have done it. So that's his recognition. Wadkhilna fi rahmatika, and enter us, all of us, both of us, into your rahmah, wa anta arhamur rahimin, with the most merciful one. And then comes inna allazina takhazul ijla sayanaluhum ghadabu min rabbihim. Now our scholars mentioned that this statement is a statement of Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, or it can be the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That he's saying that people, or Musa, the people who started worshipping the calf, they will receive my anger, from their Rabb, which means from Allah, وَزِلَّةٌ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا, and humiliation in the life of this world, وَكَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُفْتَرِينَ, and this is how we not reward, but we deal with the people who go to extremes, who cross the line. وَالَّذِينَ عَمَلُوا السَّيِّئَاتِ, this is an important part, which is the message of the Quran. وَالَّذِينَ عَمَلُوا السَّيِّئَاتِ ثُمَّ تَابُوا مِنْ بَعْدِهَا, they're people who do bad deeds, but then they turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They make the tawbah, wa amanu. Here it will mean they renew their iman. Now they are believing from their heart. Inna rabbaka min ba'di Allah ghafurur rahim. Then your Rabb, after that, will cover their sins and will show them their mercy. So tawbah is something very important. As soon as a person recognizes that there is something wrong and does acts of iman, then Allah's maghfirah and Allah's rahmah come. Now in the Exodus, it is not mentioned in chapter number 32, but it is mentioned in chapter number 34, verse number 9. And he said, which is Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, if now I have found grace in thy sight, O Lord, let my Lord, I pray thee, go among us, which means be with us. For it is a stiff-necked people. This thing comes again, stiff-necked people. And pardon our iniquity and our sin. The iniquity would be zulm. And take us for thine inheritance. So we have finished the comparative account from Surah Maryam. We took certain incidents from the life of Maryam alayhi salatu wasalam. We discussed Zakaria alayhi salatu wasalam and Yahya alayhi salatu wasalam from Quran as well as from the Gospel. We looked at an introduction to the New Testament and the Old Testament, how they are opposites, what are different books. Then we moved on to Surah Taha, and we took two incidents. The first incident was the giving of prophethood to Musa alayhi salatu salam, and the second incident, which we completed in two sessions 2 weeks ago and today, was also a very important one, which is the despite Allah's favors, how people show their disobedience, how people show their ungratefulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the main incident mentioned here is when Bani Israel asked that a God be made for them and they started to worship. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive me if I made any mistake. This is New Year. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it a better year for us. The last year was a year of trial for the entire mankind. اللهم ارفعنا هذا البلاء والوباء اللهم ارفعنا هذا البلاء والوباء اللهم ارفعنا هذا البلاء والوباء أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق يا رب لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك اللهم ارفعنا هذا البلاء والوباء اللهم ارفعنا هذا البلاء والوباء. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant Jannah to all Muslims who passed away either because of coronavirus or something else during the last year. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heal the wounds of the people who are still suffering because of the loss of a loved one, because of loss of job, because of health issues. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive all of us. ربنا اغفر لنا ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين ربي أني مسني الضر وأنت أرحم الراحمين اللهم أنت الصاحب في السفر والخليفة في المال والأهل والولد اللهم رب الناس أذهب الباس اشفي أنت شافي لا شفاء إلا شفاء شفاء لا يغادر سقما يا حي يا قيوم برحمتك نستغيث بقدرتك نستغيث بكلامك نستغيث بقرآنك نستغيث بنبيك نستغيث برحمتك نستغيث ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. I'll be talking to Imam Asif because he wanted me to continue for another couple of weeks, and I will talk about him about some topics which I have in mind. One of the topics that I've given a talk on, there are two talks on that topic, is the Ashratu Sa'a, the signs of the Qiyamah, or the things which will come around the time of Qiyamah. Another will be a couple of talks about the scripture and the history related to the story of Ashabul Qaf and Zulqarnain. So inshallah, I'll talk to Imam Asif, and whatever topic he wants me to pursue, inshallah, I will do it. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu